Hi, this is Dr. Justin Marchegiani here, and today's talk is going to be on carbohydrate recommendations. This is a very controversial area in the nutrition world, but I will try to put some good information out there. Again, it's very tough to be specific because I'm not talking to one person at a time. I'm talking to potentially thousands or millions of people. So I'm going to kind of give you my approach from a spectrum of seeing where you could fit in that spectrum as a way of customizing it to you. But hopefully everything will make sense in the end. So first thing, we're looking at calories because carbohydrates do have 4 calories per gram, and then out of those calories we have macronutrients, toxins, and we have micronutrients. We're going to be focusing today in the macronutrient family, specifically on carbohydrates. And again, carbohydrates get broken down into glucose and or fructose and a couple other sugars too, and essentially can be stored in the muscle, can be burnt up by the muscle, stored in the liver, and if both of those places are still full, our body will store it as fat. So general macronutrient recommendations. I like keeping carbs the lowest out of the 3 macronutrients. So with fat, we have fatty acids and glycerol. Protein, we have amino acids. I like keeping my carbs the lowest out of them. Again, carbs are instant energy. We can only hold about 300 to 330 carbohydrates in our liver and in our muscle on average. So once you get past that storage point, unless you're doing a lot of activity, intense activity, very active, or you're very insulin sensitive, then those carbs are going to start being stored as fat. And no one wants that. So I like keeping my fat higher because, one, a lot of the toxins that we get exposed to in our environment are actually fat soluble. So eating good quality fats, analogous to changing the oil. When we eat good quality fats, we produce bile. Bile then breaks down the fat. We spit out a whole bunch of chemicals that are conjugated by the bile, and we can excrete them. So fat's really important for detoxification, keeping toxins and chemicals moving, and it's also really important for satiety. We get a lot of chemical signals from fat and protein that really turn on the satiation signals of the brain, such as peptide YY, adiponectin, cholecystokinin, primarily produced from fat, glucagon, etc. The list goes on and on. So we get awesome signals to the apostat of our brain that tell us when we're full. So it's very helpful. We don't quite get that signal from carbohydrates, so I tend to favor foods that tell us when we're full and not to just keep on eating. And most junk foods today are just laden with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates then create a low blood sugar state, or it's called reactive hypoglycemia. So if you ever go into a restaurant and they give you, bread or pretzels, the reason why they're doing it is actually biology behind it. Biology and physiology and biochemistry, essentially. They want to create a reactive hypoglycemic state. Your blood sugar drops. When your blood sugar drops, your eyes get bigger than your stomach. You're more likely to order alcoholic beverages. You're more likely to order dessert. You're more likely to order a bigger entree. Now, that's just common sense knowledge if you understand physiology. And most people aren't aware of it. So if you go into a restaurant, you really want to avoid the refined carbohydrate because that will cause you to order a lot more stuff on the menu that you probably wouldn't have ordered otherwise. So again, carbohydrate recommendations, keeping protein slightly bigger than carbohydrate. You see, fat is still bigger than protein. That's important because fat, again, helps with protein digestion. It's important that protein and fat come together. Most times when we're getting protein just by itself without fat are going to be from super lean sources of protein, chicken breast without the skin, also going to come from junk foods and maybe even protein powders, soy protein powders, things like that. So we want to make sure we're getting good amounts of fat, protein, and then carbs at the smaller end. And I'll try to individualize the recommendations because it's not going to be the same for everyone. If you're insulin sensitive, if you have a good family history, if you're more active, if you're healthy weight already, good thyroid function and adrenal function, well, you may be able to handle more carbohydrates. So if you're going to eat carbohydrates, my recommendation, and I eat a ton of carbohydrates, they primarily come from non-starchy sources such as vegetables, broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts, asparagus. Again, these carbohydrates are high in nutrition and also low in sugar. They're also high in a lot of cancer metabolizing compounds such as diindol methane or indole-free carbonol. And then you can see the starchy carbohydrates over here would be like your sweet potatoes, your root vegetables, plantains, beets, things like that. They're higher in sugar, and again, they're going to primarily be used for instantaneous energy because they convert to sugar in your bloodstream fast, where these convert to sugar in our bloodstream very slow, so we don't quite get the instantaneous bump like we would from the starch. And the non-starchies are great if you're not active. So if you're active, you can start tipping the scale in the favor of the starchy carbohydrates. If you're a marathon runner, of course, you're probably going to need more starchy carbs than the actual non-starchy, but it's all individualized. I find most patients that I see in my clinic, I've seen hundreds of patients, thousands over the years, they typically are insulin resistant, so they do better with foods that aren't stimulating a lot of blood sugar. So factors that affect carb intake, again, we kind of already alluded to that. Genetics. If you have a genetic family history of like marathon runners or just a lot of athletes, you may be able to handle that. People that are relatively healthy, you may be able to handle it. If you evolved in a warmer weather environment. Now, some people that have whiter skin still may be able to handle higher carbs, but people that are typically have darker skin evolved in a warmer or an environment closer to the equator. The melanin in their skin, which gave them the color of their skin, is stimulated by vitamin D and ultraviolet light. So the more melanin you have, the more UV exposure, the closer to the equator you evolved, the more carbohydrate. Didn't have all the winters, therefore you had access to carbohydrate all year long, so your genes are more evolved to be able to handle it. You're more insulin sensitive. And again, family history and genetics and the evolution in a warm weather environment kind of all tie in together. Now, decrease carb intake. Well, if you have hormonal issues, if you're insulin resistant, thyroid issues, adrenal fatigue, if you're relatively sedentary, if you have a family history of diabetes, if you evolved colder weather environments such as European, Irish descent, maybe even upper Italian descent as well. For sure, in areas that have longer winters, you're going to need more fat and protein because there's permafrost that freezes the ground. You're not going to be able to get vegetation out of the ground come those winter months. So it's important that we're eating good quality fats and proteins. And our genetics respond accordingly. We tend to be more insulin resistant. So when we add in the sugar, our body pumps out tons of insulin because the cells just don't want to take it in. So if you're insulin resistant, you need less carbohydrate, primarily of the non-starchy variety, less of the starchy variety. And again, it's going to be different for every person. Some people may be in the middle. Some may be, they need to keep their carbohydrates very low. Some may be able to get away with it, and they're more active and they're okay. So how much carbohydrate recommendations? All right, so 0 to 50 would be great if you're, insulin resistant. You're already pretty heavy. And maybe you have a history of diabetes and such, you may need to keep your carbohydrates lower. 50 to 100 is a good recommendation. That's kind of where I keep mine, closer probably to the 80 to 100. If I'm not exercising, it allows me to keep my weight off, stay lean, keep good muscle mass on relatively easy. So I kind of live in this area. I have whiter skin. I evolved Austrian, Italian, Irish descent, so I do better with high fat, moderate protein, lower carbohydrate. 100 to 150 is really good. If I'm more active, I can definitely pump my carbs up here. If I'm doing CrossFit or doing a lot of Olympic lifting or sprinting or burst training, I can get my carbs up here and I'll do okay. And for some people that are more active and pretty lean, this may be a good place for them. Now, once you start pushing 150 to 300, you need to have a really good genetic propensity for exercise. You need to be very insulin sensitive. You need to have a good family history because it's really important. If you're getting up to 250 a day, that's a lot of carbohydrate, and you may look skinny, but you may have a ton of insulin going through your body. You may have a lot of glycation going in your body and creating a lot of free radical stress. So if you are going this high and you're healthy and lean, get some good quality blood work done to assess that. And if you need help with that, feel free and check out my information below. I can get you those lab tests if you need. And again, 300 grams of carbohydrate and over, and most people this tends to be way too much. This is driving insulin resistance. And again, there's exceptions to every rule. There are some people that are, professional athletes or they're marathon runners that just need this carbohydrate because they're so active. So it's different for every person. I know I'll get a whole bunch of requests saying, well, this is wrong, I can do this. Well, there are exceptions to every rule. Generally speaking, people will do better in this area. If they have a history of diabetes, they're going to be over here. If they're more healthy and more active, they can tend to go to the right of the scale. So this is Dr. Justin Marchegiani here. Hope you found this information helpful. For more information on myself, feel free and check the information below the video. Thanks. Have a great day.